What do you mean by insight? Does it differ from intuition? What do you mean by insight? Does it differ from intuition? What do we mean by intuition? Having a hunch. That's having a feeling that's the right thing. And intuition also, being sensitive, capturing something which may be conditioned, which may be personal, which may be a desire, wish fulfillment. And we must be clear and hesitant in using that word intuition. Because it may be one's own unconscious desire, one's own longing for something to happen, or sudden feeling that is the right thing to do. But I think insight is different. May we go into it together. The scientists, the physicists, the technological people have an insight into some invention. They see something new. Is that insight partial, or is an insight whole? You understand? We are meeting, I hope, together. I may have an insight, as I am an engineer, into the structure of a bridge. And I operate according to that insight. That insight is being more powerful. I adjust all my knowledge to conform or adjust to that knowledge, right? To that insight. But is that insight partial? A poet, a painter, a musician may have an insight, but it is still partial. When we use the word insight, we mean insight into the whole movement of life, not one part of it. Right? So let us together find out what we mean by insight. How does it take place? If you are interested in it. Because that may be the solution for our problems. Especially psychological issues that are such tremendous travail in all our lives. So together, let's find out what we mean by insight. I'm questioning it, so please question it also. Is insight an action of memory? One has accumulated a great deal of knowledge, psychologically or physically, and that knowledge may, being limited, see something very clearly. But that knowledge being always in the field of ignorance, because there is no complete knowledge about anything, including oneself, and when there is an insight from that limited knowledge, that insight must also be limited. So, insight we mean by that word, it is not the outcome of knowledge. Knowledge being, you can examine, say for example, all the comparative religions, the various sects, the various rituals and so on. You can examine them, study them, and come to a conclusion. Whereas that conclusion may be rational, sane, logical, but it is based on the activity of thought, and therefore it's limited. And that conclusion naturally must be limited. That's clear. Whereas if your insight has nothing whatever to do with knowledge, it has nothing to do with remembrance, but you have an insight, say, into all the comparative religions, with all their rituals, sanctions, dogmas, beliefs, and so on. If you have an insight into all that, you see they are all similar, right? They're all based on thought, and therefore all religions are limited. There is an immediate perception of it, not logical conclusion and action, but the total perception of all the religious activities in the world. Having an insight implies you see that they're essentially limited because they're put together, invented by thought. Similarly, to have an insight into one's relationship, which is much more difficult. Relationship as it is now, based on images, hopes, pleasures, fears, and so on. Essentially based on the images that thought during a period of time, maybe a day or 10 years, has built it. To have an insight into that, that is, relationship is based on images, to have an insight into that is to dispel the images. I hope you're following some of this. Suppose I'm married or have a girlfriend. My relationship actually is based on my particular like and dislike, my particular attraction, sexual or otherwise, the environmental influences, the biological demands, and I establish a relationship with another person based on that. Obviously. And is it possible to have an insight into the whole movement of relationship, not come to a conclusion that I have images, I must break them, how to break them, and so on, so on, so on, but to have an insight into it, which means to see basically what it is, fundamentally what it is. And if one has that deep insight, the action which comes out of that insight is much more logical, much more sane, and has a quality of something original, love. I hope you are following all this, right? That is, to take a very simple example, all nationalism is glorified tribalism, right? All nationalities, whether it's American, Russian, all the rest of it, is glorified tribalism, right? Moment you have see that is a very limited, narrow feeling which divides man. To have an insight into that is to be free from all the tribalism, right? Are you following all this? Or if you have an insight into the question of obedience, and following, whether it's the obedience to a guru, to a priest, to a law, and so on, to have a deep insight into this quality of following and obedience will you follow anybody? Naturally, you will obey laws. Whether good or bad, we're not discussing. How far you can go, how far you cannot go, that's not a problem for the moment. But the whole concept of following and obeying, obey a doctor, obey a surgeon, and if I'm not too neurotic and the policeman isn't too brutal, I obey. But the whole psychological desire in which lies the security of following. If I follow somebody, I feel safe. Whether it is a psychiatrist or a priest or my wife or husband, whatever it is, one feels safe, right? Now, if you have an insight into that is this, a mind, a brain that's conditioned to follow, that the feeling of following and the urge to follow completely drops away, instantly. So, insight is not brought about through will, through desire, through memory. It is immediate perception, and therefore action. when we talk about perception, is it possible to observe without the word? Please try, do it as we are talking and we'll see. Is it possible to observe a tree, a person, the speaker, to observe without the word? The word indicating all the memories, the reputation, the remembrances, without the word implying all that. Knowing the word is not the thing, can you observe without the word? Right? And when you observe, is the observer different from the observed? Goes like, one observes that tree. There, the observer, I hope, is different from the tree. Right? The observer is not the tree. That would be rather neurotic, say, I am the tree. But to observe the tree without calling it the tree, without the name and all the things associated with that name is the tradition, the memory, the past, which says that's the tree. To look at it without all that in operation, right? Please do it as we're talking about it. And can one observe oneself without the word, without all the associations connected with that word, to look at it? And when you do observe in such manner, is the observer different from the observed? Wait, I'll show it to you. The feeling of anger arises in me. Is that anger different from me? Or I am anger. But what thought has done is, a moment later, one says, I have been angry, which means I am separate from that anger. Are you following on this? Whereas the actual fact is, when there is anger, there is only anger, that feeling. There is no observer different from the observed. That division arises only after. Out of that division comes all our conflict. Right? So is it possible to observe without the word, without all the memories associated with that word? Then only the observer is the observed and eliminates altogether the division which brings about conflict. To have an insight into that is to end the division.